The War of the Ring ends on March 25th, Third Age 3019, with the destruction of the One Ring in Haradrim. Militarily, Sauron's centralized command dissolves instantly, leaving his armies without coordination, morale, or purpose. As Tolkien writes, the realm of Sauron was ended, and the ring-bearers passed into the shadow. However, the defeat of Sauron removes a unifying enemy, not every armed threat. Large regions of Middle-earth, particularly the south and east, had fought for him out of alliance or long-standing hostility toward Gondor, and these forces did not vanish with the ring. The end of the War of the Ring marks a transition to localized battles, suppression campaigns, and armed confrontations as the Fourth Age begins. Power vacuums appear where fear once enforced order. Orc bands remain in the mountains, and Easterling forces must be driven back. Tolkien emphasizes that victory does not erase the consequences of war. Though Sauron was gone, the evil that he had sown still grew and multiplied. King Elessar found much to do before all was fully ordered again, as the world is painfully brought into order not by magic, but by continued military effort. The Battle of Bywater, the Scouring of the Shire. The Battle of Bywater is the final recorded battle of the Third Age and occurs after the fall of Sauron. It takes place on November 3rd, Third Age 3019, in the Shire itself. Unlike earlier wars, this battle is fought almost entirely by hobbits against men. After Saruman escapes from Isengard, he secretly occupies the Shire through a network of ruffians under the alias Sharky. These men impose forced labor, weaponized intimidation, and armed control. Tolkien describes the transformation bluntly. There was a sound of hammers and axes, and ugly new buildings were being put up. The battle begins near Bywater when hobbit forces, led by Merry Brandybuck and Pippin Took, now hardened by war, organize resistance. Merry commands the Bucklanders, while Pippin leads the Tooks. Their tactics rely on ambush, terrain familiarity, and coordinated archery. Tolkien notes that the hobbits had trained themselves in the use of weapons and were no longer naive villagers. The fighting is brief but decisive. 70 ruffians are killed, and 19 hobbits fall. Tolkien explicitly names it a battle. So ended the Battle of Bywater, 1419, the last battle of the Third Age. This event proves that, even without Sauron, organized violence persists, and that Middle-earth's smallest people are not spared from war. The hunt for Saruman and the collapse of his power. After the Battle of Bywater, Saruman's remaining authority collapses completely. Though once the head of the White Council and a power rivaling Sauron, Saruman is reduced to a fugitive with no army, no stronghold, and no allies. Tolkien emphasizes this reversal. He was great once, of a noble kind that we should not dare to raise our hands against, a warning that now stands in bitter contrast to his final state. Saruman attempts no large-scale battle after his defeat in the Shire, because he no longer possesses the means to wage war. His followers desert or are killed at Bywater. Those who survive scatter. This absence of battle is itself significant. Tolkien shows that not all conflicts end in climactic engagements. Some dissolve through loss of legitimacy and fear. Saruman's final confrontation is not a battle, but an execution. Outside Bag End, after being exposed as Sharky, he is slain by Wormtongue. Tolkien records the moment starkly. Wormtongue's knife flashed, and he drove it into Saruman's back. With Saruman's death, the last organized resistance tied directly to the War of the Ring disappears. However, armed conflict in Middle-earth continues. Saruman's downfall represents the end of centralized treachery, not the end of violence. Orc remnants, hostile men, and unstable regions remain. Tolkien uses Saruman's quiet, ignoble death to signal a shift. Future conflicts will be smaller in scale but more widespread, as the world transitions from apocalyptic war to long-term pacification. Campaigns in the south. Gondor secures its borders. With Sauron defeated and Aragorn crowned King Elessar, Gondor faces an immediate strategic problem. Its enemies in the south and east have not been destroyed, only broken. Large forces of Haradrim and Easterlings had fought at the Pelennor Fields and the Morannon, but many did not march north and remained in their homelands. These peoples had long histories of conflict with Gondor, independent of Sauron's direct command. Tolkien states plainly that Aragorn's reign begins with war. He writes that King Elessar made peace with the peoples of Harad and of the East, but only after years of military action. Peace is the result of campaigns, not diplomacy alone. Gondor must reassert control over border regions abandoned or destabilized during the late Third Age. These southern wars are not described as single decisive battles, but as extended military operations. Aragorn leads armies into the south to break remaining resistance, dismantle hostile strongholds, and prevent renewed invasions. Tolkien confirms this ongoing warfare. In his time, the city was made fairer than it had been even in the days of its first glory, and he brought back the kingship and the peace and prosperity of Gondor. The order of events is important. Peace follows force. These campaigns mark a shift from defensive war to imperial stabilization. Gondor no longer fights for survival, but for control, security, and the enforcement of lasting borders in the early Fourth Age. The war in the east, conflicts beyond the map. While Gondor's southern borders demand immediate attention, the largest post-War of the Ring conflicts occur far from the lands described in detail by Tolkien. The east, particularly Rhûn, and the territories of the Easterlings, remains unstable after Sauron's fall. These regions had supplied vast armies to Sauron for centuries, bound by fear, alliance, and long-standing enmity toward the west. Tolkien rarely narrates these wars directly, but he confirms their existence in the Appendices. Aragorn does not rule from Minas Tirith alone. As is written, King Elessar went often to war, and specifically notes that he extended his borders far and wide. Expansion into the east necessarily involves military conflict, not peaceful annexation. These eastern wars differ from the War of the Ring in scale and purpose. No Dark Lord is unifying the enemy. Instead, Gondor faces fractured kingdoms, warlords, and resistant peoples. Battles here are likely numerous, smaller, and prolonged. The silence on specifics reflects narrative choice, not historical absence. The Red Book focuses on the west, and little is said of the lands beyond. What matters is outcome, not description. The east does not rise again in open war against Gondor. By the time of Aragorn's death in Fourth Age 120, Middle-earth is politically stabilized. Order is finally established in the east, not by treaty, but by the sword. The final suppression of orcs and trolls. The destruction of the One Ring does not result in the immediate extinction of orcs and trolls. Although Sauron's control is no more, many of his creatures survive in remote strongholds, especially in the Misty Mountains, Mordor, and the far north. As written in The Return of the King, these beings do not simply disappear. Some were destroyed, but many fled eastward or hid in dark places. Without Sauron, orcs lose coordination, but they remain violent and dangerous. Small war bands continue to raid settlements, attack travelers, and occupy abandoned fortifications. This necessitates active military suppression. Aragorn's reign includes systematic campaigns to eliminate these remnants. The text states that King Elessar hunted the servants of the enemy from the mountains and woods. These operations are not pitched battles like Helm's Deep or the Pelennor Fields. Instead, they resemble prolonged counterinsurgency campaigns. Forces of Gondor, often aided by the Dunedain and allied men, conduct sweeps through orc-held territories, destroying lairs and cutting off migration routes. Trolls, which are fewer in number but far more destructive, are specifically targeted before they can regroup. Tolkien emphasizes that evil creatures cannot build lasting societies without domination. They had no heart, nor law, nor mercy. Their eradication is not ideological, it is strategic. These final campaigns mark the gradual end of orc-kind as a military threat in the west of Middle-earth. The absence of later warfare is deliberate. Tolkien closes the military history of Middle-earth not with a final battle, but with silence. Conflict ends not because evil is eradicated, but because it is contained, diminished, and denied the ability to organize. From this point forward, history gives way to legend, and war ceases to define the age. For the full context behind these conflicts, watch Every War in Middle-earth Explained, where each major war, from the First Age through the end of the Third, is broken down step by step.